Good evening and welcome to Score Broward. Tonight's webinar, X-Ray Your Business and Deliver Five-Star Service, presented by David Hines.
So tonight we're going to talk about delivering five-star service. And we're talking about it in the context of frontline service teams, whether you're in a restaurant or it's a retail store, a law firm, a spa. There's so many different situations where you've got frontline service teams dealing directly with the customers. And as you know, it's not so easy to deliver five-star service to even get to that point and then be able to maintain it. So why is that? So two main challenges for really being able to consistently deliver five-star service. One challenge are customers, customer service. Every customer brings their own unique needs, their desires, their personalities, problems, how they were feeling bad that day, whatever. And it really requires well-prepared, capable, and motivated frontline workers. Okay. And it's hard to stay motivated. Anybody that's been working on the front line knows, you're constantly interacting with sometimes difficult customers, can lead to emotional burnout, physical exhaustion. So and in that environment, you have to have motivated people that really are engaged in what they're doing. The other big challenge is the process. So you have people issues and you have process issues. So for process management, unless you have a fairly simple service process involving maybe one or two people, it's very common to get coordination problems that leads to, not five-star service, subpar performance. I experienced this in one of my early businesses, a wholesale business we got into. We were selling cabinet and furniture hardware to kitchen cabinet makers, furniture makers. And we took orders over the phone for various items like hinges and drawer slides. We had about 5,000 items. And we had people that would take the orders, people that would pull the orders, people would then deliver the orders on our trucks. And at first, everybody would do things a bit differently. Maybe even from day to day, it might change. And there was not a lot of coordination because there wasn't a lot of communication. People didn't really understand what each other were doing. And that led to, wrong tickets going out to the wrong customers. Really was a problem. It was quite chaotic. And what we did over time, we got control of our processes. And what I'm going to show you tonight is the technique for doing that, to really understand your processes. And having done that, things really smoothed out. We, over 10 years, had incredible growth, and we were among the top profitability in our industry and service and so forth. So you need your service processes to be well thought out and standardized. And we'll talk about that. What does that really mean? They need to be responsive to the customer expectations. It's not always easy to really understand what does the customer expect, not in general, but specific to this process. And lastly, even if you have it well thought out and standardized, your frontline team members have to broadly understand it and follow it. So that's what we're going to cover tonight, is a technique that is sometimes talked about as an X-ray technique for really understanding and being able to better manage your processes. Now, so the way to deliver five-star service, number one, you have to start with engaging members of your frontline service team. We're so dependent on them to be able to, yes, follow the standardized method, but be able to adapt it, be able to buy into it. It's not five-star service if a service frontline service worker says, "I'm sorry, it's just not our policy," kind of not buying into it. So that's critical, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on tonight, about how you do that. What is this lean approach to working with the customers and working with each other, and what is this thing about standardized work? But what we're also going to do is perform, and I'm going to show you how to do this deep dive X-ray into your core service processes. You can't do this with every process, or you can, but it is somewhat involved, which involves identify your core processes. Who are the stakeholders of that process? break the process down into component parts. You'll see what I'm talking about there. And then, very important, identify the value factors valued by the stakeholders, by the customers, and further evaluate the process performance along those dimensions of the value factors. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So real briefly, this idea of lean thinking, lean management, those of you that know me know I'm very passionate about that. It's something that I discovered and used in my business originally back in the 90s. I've studied it, I've taught it hundreds of times, done consulting and advising on it. And I'm passionate about because I know it works, and I also know it's really a good way to do things. It makes it, you actually can perform better and have a less stressful environment. So the two keys to it, the two pillars of lean thinking or lean management, are continuous improvement and respect for people. Continuous improvement is this idea around processes, being able to standardize them, but in a way that is also adaptable standards, and I'll get into that. But equally critical is this notion of respect for people, and that's the way that you deal with you view your employees more as partners than kind of cogs in a wheel. They're thinking people that you want to engage and develop. And they're the ones that have to be fully engaged in this continuous improvement. So these two really go together, and you'll see that tonight. Okay, so let's get into the process side of this X-ray. What is this X-ray thing? So the first part of it is identify what are the core service processes in your business, and who are the stakeholders related to that. So let's talk about process. We often use that term, but sometimes loosely as far as what it really means. And there's a very specific meaning for process. A process is a stream of related activities that create value for the process stakeholders. So you have to understand who are the stakeholders. You're doing the activities to create value for them by transforming inputs into outputs. Okay, so there's a number of moving parts to this, and I'll go into it. And it's critical that you understand these, because this is when you really get that understanding of a process. So viewing work as a process is the best way to understand and improve it, improve those activities that you're looking at. Anybody who's worked in engineering, in computer science, programming systems, knows that one of the first things you learn is how to identify processes and manage them in this kind of formal, specific way we're going to talk about tonight. So again, a process is a work activity, a set of activities that has a beginning and an end. It accomplishes a particular purpose and is repeated regularly. So that's important to realize, because not all work is a process. You can also have projects. And those are things that are kind of one-time deals. So they're not repeated regularly. So here we're talking about things that sometimes I refer to it as everyday work. And it might be something that happens every day or every week or every month, but on some kind of regular basis. The end result of the process is some type of output. And it's important to understand what that is, because the main user or beneficiary of that output is the process customer. And the people that actually carry out the steps of the activity are the process actors. So again, just trying to kind of put in perspective what are the different pieces here, and you'll see how these fit into doing this X-ray breakdown process. So again, process customers, individuals, primary users of the process outputs. Process actors, the people who actually perform the activities. The other stakeholders, important to know, they're sometimes called organizational agents. These are the individuals who represent the organization. So it's great to be serving customers in a five-star way, but you also have to be cognizant of productivity and of cost and of compliance. So individuals who represent interests of the organization would be in a smaller business, maybe the owner, general manager. Larger business, maybe some of the upper level executives and so forth, that look after the interests of the business in terms of cost and compliance and so forth. Regulators are other stakeholders. So our processes must meet certain requirements, and we view that as compliance. The local community, others. So there could be a number of stakeholders, but one of the keys is just kind of focusing in on the main stakeholders, which are really the process customer is the most important one to be able to focus in on. So let's look at an example. This is a purchasing process. Pretty typical. Here are steps. There's 5 steps or activities. Request supplies, prepare and submit the purchase order, accept the shipment from the supplier. Now, between there and there, the supplier had to do some work, but we're not showing it as a step because it's that kind of outside our scope. We check the supplies that came in from the supplier, and then we place those supplies on the shelf. So what are the pieces or components of this process? Well, the start of it, remember everything has a start and an end of a process, is the decision to order some supplies. Somebody says, hey, I need supplies. The end, the supplies have been received and put on the shelf. So that's the scope. That's the beginning and end part. What is the output? Well, the supplies are there on the shelf. So that's that output. So basically the input was a desire to have some supplies. These activities transformed that input into, hey, the supplies are there on the shelf ready to go. So that's, how you look at a process. The process customers are whoever uses those purchased supplies. Now, these might be supplies ready to be used in a retail operation. So maybe it's an actual external customer who buys it. Could be an internal customer who's actually maybe in maintenance using those supplies to maintain some equipment. Lastly, the process actors. These are the people who perform each of these steps. It might be a purchasing agent, a warehouse clerk, could be various people, including the supplier. The supplier is a process actor, even though we don't have a specific, step that says that. And we could add that if it was important, if you had some involvement in maybe the custom work done by a supplier. Okay, so again, the most important of these to really focus in on is understand this idea of process customer. So we're trying to satisfy the needs of that process customer. So if you're serving a hamburger, is the process, your process customer is the restaurant patron in that restaurant. You're paying a supplier. The supplier who you're paying is the process customer. Or you're issuing a paycheck to an employee. The employee is the process customer. So when employees or suppliers are process customer, basically people that you have to pay, they're considered to be internal, while the clients or patrons of the business are considered to be external. And you might say, well, wait a minute now, you're talking about delivering 5-star service to your outside customers that pay and keep your business running. And yes, that's true. But what happens is if you pay attention to your internal customers, for example, treating other employees as internal customers, you get a chain effect. When these internal processes are working well, they're going to end up affecting the end customer as well. So that's the impact on that end customer. But it also helps to build the respect and trust that we need to make this whole thing work. Remember, respect for people is one of those pillars. So also just to note, when you're looking at service processes, it's very common for that external customer to also be a process actor. So when you're trying to improve a process, you have to think about and communicate with your actual outside customers. For example, if you're go and buy a hamburger at a Burger King, okay, as the customer, part of that whole process of buying and going through the whole visit to the Burger King, you, the customer, have to know how to order, know where to read, what the order is, place the right order, know how to get your tray, don't spill it, take it to the table. They pretty much hope that you will bust your table and so forth. So, all of that is part of the process, and it's something to keep in mind that your customers are actually often process actors. Okay, so we've got it, we've scoped out, we know what the core process is, and we're going to now break it down into its component parts. Now, to do that, this is really like taking an x-ray of the work, because it really helps you to understand it at a much deeper level instead of just kind of having a broad idea of what goes on. This is critical. for improving service quality. If you want to get to 5-star service, you need to do this because you're going to find that there's unique insight into the needs of the customer when you look at what they want for a particular process. And I've seen this over and over again. I've taught and implemented this hundreds of times. And I don't think I remember one time when we didn't have some new insight because we didn't think of the customer in general, what they want in general, but specifically from this process. Now, when you break the process down, you're going to identify specific tasks or steps that produce the output. And you're going to identify key points for each step. See, so by breaking the steps, now you can focus by step to say, for each step, what could make or break the step? What's critical to this happening? What would make the step easier? That's another type of key point. And lastly, what might violate some type of compliance with safety or some other standard? What might injure a worker, for example? So to do this breakdown, here's a form that's very useful. And you see you've got the name of the process, the starting step, the outputs that are produced, and who are the customers of the process. Now I've put on here room for 15 steps, but you really want to try to keep this to 5 to 7 steps, maybe even less. And the reason is this is not just for the people who do the work. This is for everybody to understand. So for example, the steps in my process of the driver making a delivery or the steps in the process of picking an order needed to be understood by the order takers and needed to be understood by the driver. So everybody at least a high level understands what everybody else is doing. And that goes a long, long way to ensuring and improving coordination. So you see the steps, who the process actors that carry each step, and here's your key points, make or break, etc. So creating this kind of process breakdown is very important to be able to actually observe. So what I'm going to do is I'll give you a chance to observe a process. What we're going to look at is a little bit fun here. Formula One pit stop, the Formula One pit stop process in 1950. And we're going to break that down so you can see how just by observing a series of activities here, how you actually chunk it into these steps. And then we'll compare it to a more modern day pit stop, and it's kind of fun to see.
But Holland comes in for a pit stop, trying to refuel and change tires. Newmore himself changes the tires. Only 4 crew members, including the driver, are allowed to work on the car. It's a tense time. Holland stays in his seat, anxious to get away. Let's watch. The tires are changed at last. A crewman polishes the windshield as Holland moves away just 67 seconds after he stops.
So it was pretty amazing, isn't it? The difference. But what I want to focus in on is the 1950 version. So you saw a lot of activity there, a lot of people doing things. And, in order to understand that process, first step is to break it down into steps. And I'll show you how one way to do it is not the only way. You might argue there's a couple of different ways, but this is probably the best way. But so steps in this pit stop process. Number one, drive the car into the pit. Number two, jack up the front of the car, right? You saw that guy coming in with that long jack and getting it jacked up. 3, change the front tires. 4, fuel up the car. So if you notice, the guy was fueling it up off the side. 5, clean the windshield. 6, attend to the driver needs, which involved giving him some water. I think he might have asked for a rag or something. And then lastly, drive the car back to the track. Okay, so 7 steps, simple, but it completely encompasses all the important things that are happening. Now, how do you break that down into the breakdown sheet? Well, here's what it looks like. So here's your steps. You got your 7 steps that I just described to you. Here are the process actors who carry out the steps. So it's important to understand who's doing what. So the driver is the one that actually drives the car in. Jacking up the front of the car was crew member 1. That was a specific crew member. A different crew member 2 changed the front tires. A different one fueled, and so forth. Cleaned the windshield. There was an attendant, and it actually, the attendant had specific limitations, was not able to really kind of touch the car, and there was certain rules back then. And then driving back to the track as the driver. Now, here's those key points I talked about. So driving the car into the pit, the driver needs to position the car in that center of the marked area. That can make or break the process. If he doesn't have it right in the middle there, that can throw off the process. People cannot reach, maybe, perhaps. Jacking up, crew member 1 jacked up the front of the car. Oops, sorry. What can make or break the process? He's got to hold that car up until both tires are changed. He was holding it up, and then when the tires were changed, he doesn't want to drop that early, because that would not only make or break the process, but it might injure a worker as well. Check tire lugs are properly tightened, fire extinguisher ready, et cetera, et cetera. None of these, so these address points 1 and 3. None of these really talk too much about make the work easier. You look at the modern day version of the process, it's obviously a lot easier. Of course, that was done with a lot more people and more upgraded technology. But I just wanted you to see what's involved in this process breakdown. It takes some practice, but with practice, you can get very good at it. Now, another view of core service processes, just so you have a little sense for some of the examples. In my business, the Trend Distributors Wholesaler, these were the core processes. Now, this was I called it my values memo back in 1999. We've been in business about 2 or 3 years. And every single employee who was hired and every employee in the company had to read this. I would actually go through it with them to make sure they understood it. And so these are the key points that everybody needed to understand. So key steps. So what are the main steps in the promise? Basically, if a customer called an order in by 4 p.m., they got it delivered on our truck the next business day. 4 steps in the process. First, we must have the item that the customer wants in stock. So that's a purchasing process, a restocking process. Then take a complete and accurate order, pick the proper items, and then deliver order to the customer. So fundamental, high level, but that's what was involved in our process. Now, I do put in some of the key points in here. It is our responsibility to ask questions if the customer is not clear, suggest items, and so forth. So I kind of built the key points into this memo, and but that's critical that you have those key points identified somewhere in writing. So in order to put that into a breakdown form, I actually took the 3 steps starting from taking the order, because the purchasing process is kind of on a different cycle, okay? When you take an order from a customer, you're taking the order at 3:30 in the afternoon, order's pulled that afternoon, loaded on a truck, ready to go out the next day, and by the driver. So the take order, pull order, and deliver order all are on a sequence there. a daily sequence. The purchasing is kind of a different cycle. So it really didn't fit. So those are some of the judgments you have to make when you look at how do I want to scope the process? What is the starting step? In this case, customer placing the order, not going all the way back to the purchasing agent. So I won't go through the details, but it gives you an idea of how you take these core processes and break them down using this approach. All right. Now, the last critical part of this whole X-ray process is the idea of identifying value factors and evaluating process performance according to those factors. So this is really where you get some real traction out of this X-ray. So value, who defines the value? It's the process customers and the other stakeholders. It's actually not you if you're not one of those, okay? They're the people that define the value, and the whole reason for doing the process is to produce value for those customers and those stakeholders. So the value is produced by the activities, as we talked about, transforming inputs to outputs. But here's the thing, if an activity or some activity in the process is not producing value, then it is creating waste, okay? Now, waste and waste elimination is one of the fundamental lean techniques behind the idea of continuous improvement. And we don't have time to go into that tonight, but I did put in the chat a link to the SCORE webinar I gave 2 weeks ago on waste elimination technique. So if you want to follow up on that, feel free to go ahead and take a look at that. So the stakeholders' perception of value, you need to go to them to find out what it is and identify them as value factors. So here's how you do that. There's 4 fundamental value factors: quality, speed, productivity, and compliance. Quality, what does quality mean? That's a general term, but for this specific process, and I'll give you a couple examples. Speed, okay, how quickly does this process need to get done? And what are the important time periods? Because from when to when, not everything is maybe important to the process customer. Productivity, okay, now we're looking at from the organization standpoint. What kind of resources are we trying to minimize? I mean, you might be doing a great job with quality and speed, but if it's costing you too much and you can't make money on it, this won't continue to be a 5-star process for long. So it's got to be a 5-star process for the organization as well. So what are you trying to minimize? Is it person hours, labor? Is that a big issue? Is it distance traveled, walking, and so forth? And lastly, compliance. What are the standards that are relevant to the process? They're safety standards. There usually are of some sort. Stress. Okay, so now you get into how process actors may be stressed by these activities, and that needs to be considered as defining the performance of the process, laws and regulations. So the way to handle this is with this process value canvas. So you see you've got the name of the process, who are the process customers, and other stakeholders. So here you've got quality and speed, and you'll note value for the process customers. So the main indicator, person or organization you go to say, was this a quality process? What do you want out of this process? And quality and speed, process customers. Productivity and compliance, who do you go to for that? You go to other stakeholders, primarily those organizational agents, the people that are responsible, controllers, maybe the owner, general manager, looking after productivity and compliance, and also process actors certainly have a say in, say the stress and safety parts and productivity to some extent. So you go to those stakeholders, get those factors, and then you assess, how is it doing? How is this process doing? So again, you ask the stakeholders, how do they describe or rate this current process performance in terms of quality, speed, productivity, compliance? What are the pressing problems that relate to the process that are affecting them? So think of it in terms of kind of what are the problems, but related to these value factors, because you're going to relate those back to those various steps in the breakdown. Is it improving or degrading? And how does it compare if you have industry standards or benchmarks? So those are the different ways you can assess an important, again, you don't do this with every process in your organization, but the core service processes, this is how you do basically one step towards 5-star service. And I'll go into the people side in a minute. So there are performance grades. And so I'll give you an example of how this works. Now, this is a support ticket handling process. This is in my book, actually. Managed service provider is the organization. These are consultants, companies, contractors that, for small and mid-sized business, they basically function like their IT department. So this is a situation where the client of the MSP has some problem. Their PC broke down, their laptop, they're having an issue, whatever. So the client requests support. Step one, a ticket is opened. The ticket is triaged. It might have to be escalated, might not. Work the ticket, fix the issue, call to confirm that it's working, and then you document it. So those are the basic ideas. Now, what were the value factors? Well, we went to the process customers, who are the clients, and we said, what's important to you about this process? Number one was complete resolution of the issue. They wanted the thing fixed completely, not like it's going to pop back or not fully fixed. And there we gave it, you actually see you grade it. We gave it an A-, because we did have data that said 95% of the issues were fully resolved. You don't always have that kind of level of data. So sometimes these are more subjective judgments, but nevertheless, it's important to assign a grade of some sort, kind of an A through E kind of grade. Acknowledge receipt of client requests. Now, this is an area where clients put in their request and they'd like to be acknowledged. These are usually critical things, and they don't want to wonder if you actually saw their request or not. And here we gave them a C, because acknowledges were only given if the client asked for it. So that was a deficiency there that needed to be worked on. Client said no hassles, just make it easy, and most clients did see it as relatively easy. Got an A-. Okay, so you see how we're going and talking to the process customers, in this case the clients, finding out what was quality, and then grading the process. Speed, first response, A-, B+. In terms of productivity and compliance, now here's where we go to other stakeholders. So there we go to the manager of that department, and looked at, they felt the number of tickets per labor hour was a key productivity measure. And they got a B because it seemed like there was excessive time going on. There was, it wasn't as efficient as it could be. Some other ones: compliance, maintain data security and privacy, no known security breaches, but they're supposed to comply with documentation requirements, and text often shortcutted that activity. They got to see. So in summary, by doing this, you see, this is not a bad process. It wasn't really 5-star. They did fix this, the acknowledgement, and it was close to 5-star. And then in terms of the actual productivity, is it 5-star to the company? There were some deficiencies there in terms of productivity and also some compliance. So it did need work in that respect. Okay, so that's all the process. That's the X-ray part of this. But again, with any kind of frontline service, you have to pay attention to the motivation, engagement, and commitment of your frontline workers. And that's where the lean comes in terms of respect for people, and some of all the other lean techniques all are focused around fully engaging everybody. Here, I'm going to talk about specifically standardized work. And I'll show you how that X-ray process breakdown fits into the standardized work. So standardized work is basically a lean technique to document, approve, and train employees on the current best way of performing a process. Current best way. Now, you notice I don't say best practice. To me, best practice is a myth. There's no such thing. Whatever might be best practice today is most likely going to be different tomorrow. Things are changing so often. And in reality, it's really hard to come up with and identify a specific best practice. So standard work is the current best way. So it's meant to ensure everybody who performs the work is following the best currently known way of doing things. However, it's also a challenge to anyone who can suggest an improvement to create a new current best way. So it's kind of a genius idea in that respect. It lets you have that consistency and control of knowing uniformity of how the work is done, and yet it opens the door to continual improvement. So it's sort of like you see here, where if you're trying to roll up this incline of quality improvement, the standard work, once you get to a certain point, it puts a wedge in so you don't roll back. Because as I'm sure you know, if you don't document and make sure everybody's on board, oftentimes people forget what the best way to do something is. So it puts a wedge in, and then as you come up with better ways through engagement of everybody, you then roll this up a bit, and the new standard work puts a wedge in at a higher level. So it keeps it from rolling back, and it lets you keep going up that hill. So these are examples of standard work guides. So again, these are not procedure manuals. These are guides that are relatively simple. Try to keep it to that maximum 7 steps if you can. Easy to understand, accessible to everyone, not just the people doing the work. Being visual is great as much as you can. Here's a visual steps here, some other visuals. Sometimes just a good old checklist is a great way to have a standard work. So the list you saw earlier about the MSP handling the support tickets, that's a standard work guide. That's a basic checklist, but it does include, if you look closely, some of the other key points. What is the goal? The goal is to do this within 10 minutes. It gives you, to make it easier, say, use this email template instead of having to create a whole new email. So in a very nice, concise way, it gives you the key points for each step. Here's another standard work guide from World War II. And this was actually, many people credit us winning the war because of this, because the challenge was, most of the men were off to war, and this was the first time that at a broad scale, the women of our country had to go in and learn how to make bullets and machines and so forth. And this was the training method that was used. But this idea of the basic standard work and see a few steps clear that everybody can see, here's an example of how it was used even back then. Now, I said I was going to relate it to how the process breakdown work can be used for standard work. But the process breakdown really lets you get an even better understanding of that current best way. So for example, here's the process breakdown sheet from the Formula One pit stop. And you see you've got, we went through this before. So you can, having done that, you can use that material to create a standard work guide. And here's an example. Now, this is just one way to do it. Maybe not the best way, or maybe other better ways, but you can see the 7 steps, very visual, actually showing the pictures. So it shows each step, and then it shows kind of the individual key points that were worth putting on here. Driver, alert, position your car in the center of that marked area. Crew 1, make sure, hold that car up until the tires are changed. Don't be distracted and drop it down. This might be a poster that's put up on the wall near the pit stop area. Or it could be something that's on a desk, but the more you can make it visible, and I love wall space. I can always tell if a firm understands the idea of visual controls and standard work. I look at the walls and I can see if they're using it or not, because that's critical area that everybody's looking at all the time for a great extent. Now, here's another technique you can use to make this standard work practical. Because, many times you do want more detail than 5 or 6 or 7 steps. And so what you can do is you can have a process summary at a high level showing customers, actors, and so forth. There might be attachments. This was actually one that we did for political campaigning. One of the processes involved there, creating lists. And this is the high level summary that everybody would see. So this is posted. So you see determine campaign objectives, select save search, generate draft list. Main outputs, who are the actors? So OR for organizers, data team, and so forth, okay? So this is the one that, this is the primary standard work everybody would understand in the whole campaign. Then you have the process detail. And you'll note that's where not only do you take the main steps and you explode them out into sub-steps. So see, determine campaign objectives is this first step right here. And it's exploded out into 3 sub-steps. And here's where the key points come in. Because to a large extent, key points are more important for the people doing the work than necessarily everybody else. So again, this is another practical way of organizing your standard work, whether you do that for your core service processes or for any important process. This is an area where I really advocate any of the important processes in your organization, whether they're service or administrative processes or so forth, that you do establish the standard work. Standard work works, okay? What is it doing? It's stabilizing this current best way. So everybody understands that it's not changing from day to day. So we're getting consistency, not only in day to day, but in how all the workers do it. You don't have one worker doing something one way and another worker doing it another. And I can tell you, when you do that process breakdown and you begin to, relate that and show that to the process actors, you'll often say somebody that says, gee, I don't do it that way. No, you don't. So even just doing that actual breakdown will often improve that understanding of communication and coordination, because oftentimes people are doing things we don't realize they're not doing it in the same way. So, but it also makes this incremental improvement, this getting better, a little better every day, part of everyday work. Okay, that's one of the key points of this idea of continuous improvement, of that pillar of lean thinking, that you don't work around things and just get done and move on, because most likely that problem is going to pop up again. So you want to try to eliminate it permanently. Provides an easy and uniform way of training new employees. So it's great. Once you invest in this, now you've got that document that you can use. We use it all the time at Trend to train new employees, and it makes it easy. And as long as you're keeping that up to date, now you have the current best way. So you don't even have to worry about, oh, what are we doing? What's the current way we're doing things? And lastly, improves that teamwork and coordination, because now there's more awareness of what others are doing and more predictability. See, that's key, because you need to be able to count on what the other person is doing. You can't, say, well, I'm not sure what they're going to do today. So those are all the ways in which the standard work really goes a long way to getting you towards that 5-star service. Now, the other part of it I was going to tell you about is, how do you reinforce this on a regular basis? And that's another lean technique called stand-up meetings. And you may have heard of this. These are brief gatherings of a team, a department, some group of related employees that are held regularly at their place of work. The main purpose is to review the prior day's activities, results, problems, wins, and then plan for what's happening today. So it's a great chance to have an ongoing conversation about the day-to-day operation, which is going to support training and reinforcing the standard work and even improving it. This is often a good venue in which to ask people, hey, Joe just came up with an idea. What do you all think of that? It's a chance to bring that up. also, though, the meeting is useful for building that kind of trust and respectful interaction that's part of this whole package, especially when you include recognition and celebration in the meeting, even if it's just quick. People really like to be recognized. I mean, people want to be paid too, but where you really get that high level of engagement and commitment is when you recognize fairly what people are doing individually in these meetings. The logistics, they should be held daily if at all possible. Many people say, God, I can't afford to do that. But the people that do it say, I can't afford not to do it. It's too important. It's like a heartbeat, it'd be like saying, well, I'm going to have my heart beat, once a week or something. But when you get this going and you see how it works, it really is important. Most effective meetings, though, are held at the place of work, which we call the Gemba in lean terms, usually with less than 20 people. If you get much over that, it's getting a little hard to work with. So you want to try to have these meetings in about 20 people or less. Limit them to 15 to 30 minutes, 15 if you can do it. Because, then you have a clear, simple agenda, recognize and celebrate individual or team performance whenever appropriate. But this is not the meeting to get off on tangents. Now, if you're doing it every day, you're going to be picking up issues every day. And there's various techniques for making this even a more formal suggestions and so forth. But just the basic, meet to say, what did we do yesterday? What's coming up today? And let's review any issues with standard work. Now, more and more, of course, we have a lot of work from home situations, remote office, and you can use Zoom or similar platform that works pretty well. It's not the best, but it certainly helps with accessibility if you're not available to come into an office. And it can help when you have multiple shifts. So you might have an in-person meeting of your main shift that maybe people that come in at 8 in the morning, but if you have another group, smaller group at 4 o'clock, or maybe 4 and 6, you hold a Zoom meeting at 5, something like that. So that is it. Those are the ways in which you can deliver 5-star service. I've seen it done. We did it in our company. As I say, over 10 years of developing and applying some of these techniques, we ended up being 5 times the profitability of the industry standard. The industry standard for service in wholesale building supply distribution was about 92% fill rate. That's the rate at which how many orders that come in are delivered on time and complete. We were at 98, and 98 is really hard to get to. So, I know it works. I've seen it in my own company. I've seen it over and over again in companies that I've worked with in various capacities. So with that, I will encourage you to do it. Here's my email. I'm more than happy to respond to any questions. And I actually am a SCORE mentor too. So I am working with a number of companies, some existing, some startup companies. But feel free to send me an email, or if you want me as a mentor, I'm on the Broward mentor list. Here's that prior SCORE webinar. So I'll go ahead and, when I be quiet here and turn it over to Lexi, I'll put it into the chat. And this is my book, The Essence of Lean. Been very successful. It's a good, clean introduction to lean for people who are not in manufacturing. That's one of the issues with lean, is that it was designed for manufacturing, and oftentimes it's hard for people in service or small business to really understand it.